Is there anyone who does not have a Cherezig text? You have.
It says there's a missing page.
It says there's a missing page, but it may not be a page we're going to use. In our ongoing practice of meditation, whether it is in one tradition or multiple traditions, more and more we should be discovering that we manufacture our own experience on an ongoing basis, moment by moment. If we have held the world responsible for our suffering, this is not good news. We're in serious jeopardy of losing our enemy. We could be grateful that we're about to discover the real one, but that's not likely. In the practice of the Mahayana, we effect a transformation by virtue of the very thing that brought us to wherever we are, which is to say, continuous repetition, whatever it is. I love all beings, I hate all beings. Either one of them you can practice and it will bear its fruit. In time, it's guaranteed. Due to the truth of interdependence, all the things that we do with our speech, with our minds, with our bodies, continuously plant seeds. And this fundamental understanding is what drives the Mahayana. It's like you repeat over and over actions of body, speech, and mind, and things change. But you have to repeat. You can't just understand the mechanism and then it will take effect, because it won't. It's the actual repetition. And since, of course, both the body and the speech are the slaves of the mind, what we do with our mind is the most important. Gradually, what we do with our minds will bear its fruit in our bodies and our speech. So in the Mahayana tradition, what we sometimes call the causal path, we engage in producing causes by mental activity, physical activity, and with our speech. We produce the causes that bear the fruit. One of the not so fortunate things about that approach is that we naturally have a certain sense of where we're going. And that sense can be fairly solid. We can feel reasonably certain. And this is why engaging in the Mahayana path before the Vajrayana is so important. Because we need to feel that certainty. Without that sense of appreciation for the direction we're moving in, and also an experience of a transformation in progress, we will not continue. We're all educated, we're smart. Why would you? If it didn't bear fruit, and you had a strong sense of what that fruit should look like and you weren't getting it, at some point you will stop. The downside is that even when you get it, it won't be the whole thing. Because you don't actually want just the fruit. You want the whole tree, the whole bush, and the ground that it's growing out of, and the weather that waters it and takes care of it. You want all of those things. And you actually need all of those things in order for it to work. So in some senses, the Mahayana is much easier because it has a kind of comprehensible sense to it. I can understand what I'm doing. That is to say, if I'm practicing shamatha and my mind is wandering, I can notice that and I can apply an antidote and come back from that. But the problem persists along the lines of the story about Gandhiji in the prison. Punlap Rinpoche ponders if maybe in fact the prisoner who said, "What's your name?" and then Gandhi says, "I am Gandhiji," and that prisoner laughs and then everybody laughs, that maybe that prisoner was actually a guru for Gandhi. Indeed, everybody wanted to be Gandhi. The problem was, so did Gandhi want to be Gandhi. The identification is the issue. As soon as we become something, we cannot be something else. It becomes very difficult. It becomes its own prison. So we could talk along those lines all day. We've already done that. Moving on to the Vajrayana approach. Recalling at least the proposition, if not in fact the experiential truth, that we produce our own experiences. Mental experiences are easy to relate to in that way. Physical experiences, not so easy. Speech, of course, is just the outcome of all of these things coming together. But you could also say we produce that too, even if we're sound asleep, spiritually. So the Vajrayana rides on a number of principles. One of them is we produce literally all of our experience. Which is not to say that someone might hit us over the head with a club, but we produce the experience that generates. Now that's a little hard for us to work with directly, because we have a long and steady and deep habit of looking somewhere else for the producer. Because if it's us, we can't be a victim. And that's a problem. Sometimes we rely upon being the victim. It helps us determine what we're going to do. But from the Vajrayana perspective, within the world of samsara, the world of confusion, there are only victims. That's all there is. So discovering that actually can then be helpful. When you sit in shamatha, you can even discover it. I sit in shamatha. Do I decide what I'm going to think? The next time you sit in shamatha, if you don't already know how that works, pay attention. And when a thought arises, a feeling arises, ask yourself the question, where did it come from? Did I decide to do that? or not. If you did not decide to do it, that's not in and of itself a problem. But if you don't recognize that you didn't decide to do it, that is a problem. So as we enter the practice of Cherezig, we do what we did in the beginning of shamatha, that is to say, we do a refuge. We give rise to bodhicitta, which is ubiquitous in all of the practices of the Mahayana and the Vajrayana. You must give rise to the attitude that your sole reason for practicing the Dharma is to bring benefit to all sentient beings. And that doesn't mean you exclude yourself, but it's good to make the sentient beings first, and then include yourself in that group, rather than I bring benefit to myself, and then I can benefit all sentient beings. That's actually how it's meant to work, but if you mentally hold that view, you've cheated yourself out of a certain place, which is to say, the primary thing is all sentient beings. You could say the primary thing is me, because if I can't do it, then I can't do this thing. But maybe you can't ever do it, but still, by virtue of your practice, you may bring others to engage in practice who can do it. So there are many more ways in which just holding the aspiration can bear fruit. Now, I want to also ask the question, and address it a little bit, of if we understand in simple terms how the transformation takes place in the Mahayana, that is to say, I generate loving kindness over and over and over and over again, all day long, and lo and behold, at the end of the day, I feel loving kindness for sentient beings. What to speak of the end of a week, the end of a month, the end of a year, the end of your life? Of course, the more seeds you plant, the bigger the forest. So the idea is we just keep planting seeds. It's best if we don't know what the outcome looks like. But of course, we can't help projecting. So to some degree, we interfere with our own efforts by nurturing a sense of a solid idea about what the outcome looks like. But that's just an obstacle that's inherent in our confusion. So in one way, not to worry, we'll work with that. But note in your little notebook where you keep track of potential problem here, the potential problem is we think we know what the outcome is. Way before we should have any idea like that. But again, we're smart, we're educated, this is what we do all the time. So it's a little hard to tell ourselves or chastise ourselves for doing it, since this is how we bring about transformation ordinarily. We repeat, we repeat, we repeat. So in the Mahayana tradition, the change is we're saying, okay, you've repeated these things. Now move away from that and repeat these things. And don't worry about the outcome. But of course, our small mind says, don't be tricked. Look and see, like, what's going to come from this. And then we get the idea that we know what the outcome is. And then we get disappointed because the outcome doesn't occur. So just to explore these things a little bit conceptually first, we move into the Vajrayana, and the transformation there is nothing less than the necessity for us to become professional fakers. Fakers. Yeah, you heard it right. Professional fakers. The method is to imagine that we are already awakened, that we are already enlightened, which is actually the underlying philosophical proposition of the Mahayana too. We are already awakened. That's not the problem. Even the Buddha is noted for saying that. The problem isn't that, he said to one man who approached him in the street, the problem isn't that I'm awakened and you're not. That's not the problem. The problem is that I recognize that awakened mind and you don't. But there's no distinction to be made between yours that you don't see and mine that I do see. They're the same. So the job is, how do we come to recognize what is? Not what can be, not what will be, but what already is. So you see the difference, and you can see the difference between two key factors between the Mahayana in particular and the Vajrayana. In the Mahayana, it's about transformation. In the Vajrayana, it's about recognition. The recognition isn't likely to occur without some transformation. But the distinction between recognition and transformation is profound. So we bring that to bear even in the practice of shamatha when we say, you notice that the myriad of thoughts that we might call distractions while we're practicing meditation are just thoughts. They are just mental activity. They are just, in the more profound manifestation of that kind of philosophy, they are the continuous, clear expression of the Dharmakaya. You cannot turn it off. Even the Buddha doesn't turn it off. The difference is the Buddha recognizes the manifestation for what it is. We attach to it. I like it, I don't like it. I want it, I don't want it. Let's get more, let's get less. Like we're continually involved in a push and pull with it. So, now going back to, we generate our own experiences. Nowhere do we make use of that fundamental thing, which even modern science agrees with 100%. We manufacture our own experiences. It's a daunting proposition, in fact, but it shouldn't be. So, in the Vajrayana, we take that proposition to heart, and we engage. Well, we take it to heart, and it's based on the assumption that we understand that we manufacture our experiences, all of them, without exception. And based upon that, we feel happy, we feel unhappy, we feel peaceful, we feel angry, we feel jealous, we feel all of these things unfold. If we can understand and see ourselves doing this, even in the practice of shamatha, that's all that's actually necessary, then we have it. If we can sit down at any time and just see those things as if we were watching somebody else's movie, then we have the key that opens the door. But we can't sit there and chastise ourselves for being distracted, thereby missing the whole thing. It's like, you know, people on Sunday, on football Sundays. I don't watch sports, but I know that many people do. And what I have recognized is that people not only watch games, they scream at the television. I mean, since I was a kid, I always thought, what is this? Why do we do that? But You scream at the television. Thereby, you could say, missing the game. Not only missing the game, by turning to your neighbor and saying, "Did you see that? That was a wrong call," or whatever it is. So we miss the game, and we get ourselves upset, and each other. So we could say, from our Dharma perspective, our lives generally are about missing the game. Unfortunate, but true. So we would like to open that door and walk in and sit down like the whole thing is just being run for us. That's it. It's not for somebody else. They have their own game. So we're going to step into Cherezig with the full assumption that all of my experience is self-generated, auto-generated, however you want to talk about it. And maybe for the first time for many people, they are going to generate their own experience and they're going to recognize that that's what's happening. In order for that to happen, we have to have a little bit of stability in our meditation, which is why we're practicing shamatha. You have no stability, you can't do this yet. You'll find it just frustrating and irritating. But you may find it that way anyway. But that's self-generated. So I think the point here then is we want to see, so how does this crazy Vajrayana thing work? Where we generate visualizations, we have relationships with the visualizations, we engage in kind of miraculous activity through those visualizations, miraculous activity that we can easily say, I don't relate to this, but that's part of the game. I don't relate to this. So if we can include all of our experience in the practice and see it unfolds as that's happening, then we are indeed potentially engaging in the Vajrayana. Potentially. All right, so we'll start. We're going to start on page 11. And we're going to have a little English and we're going to have a little Tibetan. And there's a reason for that. I made a discovery on a retreat once where I was so irritated with the Tibetan that I started doing everything in English. And then I felt guilty, and so I did some of it in Tibetan, and then I started rotating back and forth. So I made a little discovery. The discovery was that they both have advantages. The English has the advantage that you can understand the words. If you can't understand any of the words, then why would you do any of it? You're not getting anything. On the other hand, understanding the words has its own problem, because we associate that understanding with the thing that's being pointed at, but we're not getting the thing that's being pointed at. So I would recite the Tibetan sometimes and the English sometimes, and what I discovered was once I knew what I was supposed to do, the Tibetan had an advantage in that I didn't know the Tibetan, but it was like a metronome. You know, a metronome is just click, 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 click. It doesn't give you any information, really, but it gives you a kind of meter. a cadence. And so the Tibetan gave me a kind of cadence. And I could do the practice because reciting it, it also had an enchanting melody sometimes. And so that was helpful. So we're going to do some of each and a little explanation about what we're doing. So first we're going to start with the refuge on page 11. And here let's read page 11, the English part of it, starting with Sanjay, or until enlightenment. Let's recite that together one time. Until enlightenment, I take refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the excellent assembly. Through the merit of generosity and other virtues, may I accomplish Buddhahood for the benefit of beings. Now, let's stop a moment and ask, what does the English mean? Until enlightenment. What the hell does that mean? I mean, would I know it if I was enlightened? Apparently the Buddha knew that he was enlightened. There's numerous statements made about him recognizing that. But I'm not enlightened, so I don't even really know what I'm saying when I say until enlightenment. So I take a kind of, like you're driving your car on a long drop and you take rest stops. So I take a rest stop and I ask myself, what do I know about enlightenment? One is, it is utterly devoid of confusion. What is confusion? Confusion is believing my experiences to be real, for example, to be something substantial. To believe that I can identify with and actually believe that I am certain things, like I could identify with my gender, my race, my economic position, my being a teacher, for example. I could identify with a myriad of things. We could all make our own list that started out with 100 things, and it'd be easy to make that list pretty much as fast as you could write. So, enlightenment does not have that identification. That much I'm clear about. Identification blinds. So I would like to be awake, not asleep. Therefore, the identification must be at least seen at the time that it occurs. That's kind of the minimum. You have to see it happen. So, until enlightenment, until I am clear about this, I go for refuge in the Buddha. What's the Buddha? The Buddha is the awakened mind itself. It's not some person who lived how long ago. It's actually the awakened mind itself. So, when I say I go for refuge to the Buddha, what I mean is I go for refuge to that awakened mind. What's the Dharma? The teachings, the body of teachings, spoken and written, that we study, that we meditate on, that we contemplate. The Dharma is what leads us to the place of recognizing that Buddha, that awakened mind. So I'm just in my mind connecting the dots. We could each do that in our own way, connecting the dots, and the excellent assembly, which is the exalted Sangha, those beings who have accomplished the Dharma, or at least are highly realized. Sometimes we meet them in this life. People like the Dalai Lama pass through town and we go and see them, and other great beings. There are actually quite a few. We are not devoid of these resources. So that's what I mean in English when I say that. Until enlightenment, I take refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, and excellent assembly. And then I say, through the merit of generosity and other virtues, these are the 6 perfections, May I accomplish Buddhahood for the benefit of beings. In other words, may I practice those 6 perfections for the benefit of all sentient beings. Simple. Now I get it. So then, when I recite the Tibetan, I try to let my mind rest on the meaning that I understood when I read it in English and contemplated it. But when I recite it in Tibetan, I'm not relating to my conceptual understanding. So we need to step back when we recite it in Tibetan and not try to bring the conceptual understanding into it. Just let it unfold. So let's recite this now 3 times. If you could lead us in that, Melinda, in Tibetan. Soki chonam la janchu badu dani kyasu dani chen soji pe sonam vidrova penche sanje ruvayo sanje chodam soki chodam la janchu badu dani kyasu dagi jen soji pe sonam nidrova penche sanje ruvayo sanje chodam soki chodam la janchu badu dani kyatsu dagi jen soji pe sonam nidrova penche sanje ruvayo. Now, by engaging in this way, we have begun to manufacture our own experience. So it's important to recognize that. One more thing. Though we have mentioned bodhicitta, we have not included it in this refuge. So in order to include the bodhicitta in this, we need to imagine in front of us all sentient beings. So we imagine in front of us, by virtue of our past connections since time without beginning, we have connection with all sentient beings. Through our wish to benefit them, we imagine that they appear in front of us. Like a great cloud extending to the limits of space itself, sentient beings appear. And when they appear, we go for refuge with our mind's eye on all of those beings and our wishes that they would be free of suffering and its causes, and so on, while we recite the liturgy. So let's recite the liturgy once more. First, giving rise to this sense of uncountable beings extending to the very limits of space, like a huge dust cloud. So many beings, you can't see any individual one. But nonetheless, since time without beginning, there is not a single one with whom we have not had relationship. Tibetan. No, we're doing page 11. We're doing page 11. The refuge. Okay?
You wanted to do Tibetan?
Yeah. Tibetan on page 11. The Sanjay Chodong.
Tande chudam soki chunam la janchu padu dani kyasuchi dagi jinso jipe sonam gidrola penche sanje drubajo.
Good. Now we're taking a step into combining the visualization with the understanding of the meaning of that visualization, including our aspirations for all sentient beings expressed through our recitation, which can be in either Tibetan or English, or both. We have a kind of an interesting conundrum that we often talk about, which is that the Tibetan carries a certain blessing with it by virtue of the enormous number of beings who have recited these prayers, including those who have attained full realization by virtue of engaging in these practices. On the other hand, we have the wise words of Khenpo Tsultrim Rinpoche, who once said, Tibetan became like it is by virtue of recitation, not by virtue of never reciting it. So if you don't recite these prayers in your own language will also never carry the blessings. So, there you are. Following refuge, we move into the visualization. When we generate a visualization in a Vajrayana practice, we are generating a set of symbols or pointers. And those symbols and pointers are always in some kind of a form. A being, in other words, generally. And while that being is visually comprised of an array of symbols, it is also the case that that being is a living presence, not meant to be like a statue, but a living presence. Not living in the sense of being confused and like an average human being, but just that it is imbued, it is animated, imbued with life, but not the life that we talk about when we talk about biological life, for example. So let me explain or give you the visualization for Cherezig, and then we'll go back into the text. So this begins, generating the visualization is called the generation phase of the practice. So every Vajrayana practice has a visualization phase. In the beginning, we imagine that having finished refuge now, we imagine that in front of us still all sentient beings are there like this vast cloud. And even though sentient beings include everything from microscopic insects and almost anything that's living, we say anything that has a mind is a sentient being. That isn't actually altogether that helpful. But good enough, a rough cut. We now imagine that all of these beings are in front of us, and we imagine on the crown of our heads, just like slightly above the crown of our heads, just a little bit, there is a lotus in full bloom, white lotus. And on that lotus, a moon disk appears. So a moon disk is a flat disk, kind of like the moon appears in the sky, like a flat disk. And it's the color of the full moon at its zenith, at its highest point on a clear night, that kind of radiant white. Not quite pure white, but it's like that. And so this is a disk that rests on the lotus. Already we have two symbols. The lotus is a symbol of wisdom, and the moon disk is a symbol of skillful means. And immediately, as we have generated that visualization, and you just do your best with this, the single most important thing, you want to be a good visualizer, the single most important thing is believe. That is to say, believe that it's there. So I visualize a lotus. Instead of telling myself, you can't visualize, that thing isn't the right lotus, it's a daisy, it's not a lotus, and so on. You'll never do it. You have to have this sense of, it's there. Whether I see it or not, it's there. I know what it looks like, and it's there. So if you continually remind yourself of its actual presence, gradually it will come to bear. This is instruction from Kala Rinpoche, that a clear visualization is nowhere near as important as the confidence that it is there. The rest will follow. Indeed, that is how it works. If we look at our own experience, we can see that also in just our own general experience. So, the lotus and moon seat, and on that lotus and moon seat appears, standing up on that moon seat, what we call a hri. It's a seed syllable. You can learn it if you don't already know it, but it's standing up vertical on the moon. A seed syllable is like a seed that makes something else that is the essence of something else. So if you plant a corn, a seed of corn, you will get a corn plant. If you plant a daisy, you will get a daisy. If it's a tomato seed, it'll grow a tomato. So this is the seed of Cherezig that appears on the union of wisdom and skillful means. Appears standing up there. So then you imagine that from that seed syllable, the hri, light radiates in all directions. They often say the 10 directions. What they mean is the 8 cardinal points of a compass, so like a circle, and up and down. So it's meant to be a shorthand way of saying in all directions, really, all directions. So the light generates, the light radiates out, and it does two things. One is it strikes all these sentient beings who are in front of us, behind us, above us, below us, everywhere. It strikes them. And on the crown of their heads appears a lotus and moon seat and a hri. The light from our own hri also strikes the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, all the awakened beings in all of the realms, and those Buddhas and Bodhisattvas respond spontaneously with blessings. We could talk about blessings another time. Those blessings come to us in the form of light. That light strikes the hri on the crown of our own head, and instantly the Hri is transformed into Cherezig. Likewise, the light from the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas strikes the Hris on the crowns of the heads of all sentient beings, and instantly Cherezig appears on the crown of each being. Keeping our minds on Cherezig, we notice. So I'm going to say notice because we are not meant to think that we are making it. We're meant to think that we are witnessing something. So we witness that from Cherezig's body, 5 colored lights radiate. Those 5 colored lights are red, green, blue, yellow, and white. So they are not the primaries and secondaries or anything like that. These actually relate to the 5 Buddha families, which we also can talk about another time. So Cherezig radiates these 5 colored lights, which is essence is to say that he is in essence a Buddha. But he is not appearing as a Buddha. He is appearing as a Bodhisattva. He is not solid. He is translucent, not exactly transparent, but translucent. That is to say, you could see through him. He appears clearly, but is fundamentally not, there's nothing of substance there. His body is comprised of symbols. He has one face. He has one face, which may be an odd point to make, but one face in this case means that he's a 7th, 8th level bodhisattva. One face is equated to one taste in the Mahamudra system. So one face means that he experiences all things as their essence. In other words, there are not things that are agreeable and disagreeable, nor people who are agreeable and disagreeable. Their essence is all exactly the same. So he experiences the essence. His face is white, which also is not an accident. The white face and the white body indicate that he is utterly devoid of obscurations and defilements such as conflicted emotional relationships with others and other things. He holds in his right hand a crystal rosary or mala, which indicates he has 4 arms, by the way, so we'll get back to that. In his upper right hand, he holds a crystal mala, which symbolizes or points to his ability to attract sentient beings from the depths of samsara. In other words, those beings who are more deeply confused are more attracted to his presence. In his left hand, he holds a lotus, which is in full bloom, which symbolizes his ability to enter the realm of confusion, samsara, but to be completely untouched by it, not affected by that confusion. The lotus is used for that because the lotus grows out of a muddy pond, but is itself not touched by the mud. So it's an appropriate symbol. Cherezig's back appears to be supported by another large moon disk, which is sitting on edge behind him, and that symbolizes the compassion, the relative and ultimate levels of compassion completely pervading his being. He wears over his left shoulder, a deerskin is draped over his left shoulder. He did not go hunting and kill that deer, but the deer represents an ability to completely subdue conflict. And there's just stories about that exemplify that. So the deerskin is a symbol of that ability. He is adorned with 5 colored silks, which are the 5 colors of the lights that radiate from him and the 5 colors of the Buddha families. On his head, on Cherezig's head, so you have Lotus, Moonseed, Cherezig. On Cherezig's head is the Buddha Amitabha. The Buddha Amitabha is red in color, and in this case is just the size of your thumb sitting on the top of Cherezig's head, quite small. In some depictions it's so small you have to look for it. And Cherezig actually is an emanation of Amitabha. So we have Amitabha Buddha emanating a Bodhisattva, Cherezig. Amitabha Buddha is also held to be Cherezig's spiritual teacher, his guru. So all of these things together are a little bit much to put together, but that's how the picture fits together. Now we're going to read in English on page 14, 15, and wait a minute, where am I here? No, I'm sorry. On page 12, 13, and 14, we'll read the description of Cherezig's form. I forgot the 4 arms and the 2 legs. He is not crippled. He has 4 arms. The 4 arms represent the complete accomplishment in his stream of being of the 4 immeasurables: loving kindness, compassion, joy, and equanimity. So completely pervading his stream of being. His 2 legs in Vajrasana, crossed, represent the union of skillful means and wisdom, or the relative and ultimate truths. So completely understanding those things as well as the relative and ultimate accomplishments. So his 2 legs combined represent these 2 things that are normally seen as there's this and there's that. Now there's just one. So we'll read from page 12 through 14. And then we'll just take a moment of silence, and then we're going to take a little break.
On the crown of
Myself and sentient beings, pervasive as space, is a lotus and moonseed. From the Pri appears the noble Cherezig, clear, white, and radiating 5-colored light. Smiling and gazing with compassionate eyes, the first pair of his 4 hands are joined together. The lower 2 hold a crystal mala and a lotus. Adorned with jewels and silk, he wears a deerskin upper garment. His head ornament is Amitabha, and his 2 legs sit in Vajrasana. A stainless moon supports his back. He is the embodiment and essence of all sources of refuge. So on the break, what's important is to continue to take full responsibility for your experience by continually recalling, which is a way of saying be mindful of, the presence of Cherezig on the crown of your head. And you could visualize that clearly. You can also just recall the presence. You could also visualize Cherezig on the crown of other people. You can also just recall the presence. In other words, the conviction, the confidence that that is Cherezig, that it is there, and function from that perspective. So in this way we really manifest taking responsibility for our own experiences. So we'll take about a 10-minute break. Again, silence on the break, please.